Hey guys, it's me, Sam Stein, managing editor at the Bulwark, back again. I am joined, gratefully, by Congressman Ritchie Torres of New York, as part of a number of different interviews I've been doing with Democratic officials about just where the hell the party goes from here and what life is like in the age of Trump 2.0. Before we get into it all, first of all, Congressman, thank you for joining us. Secondly, for you watching, please do click that subscribe button. We're able to do these types of interviews and disseminate them widely because of your support. So thank you for that. Congressman, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
It's an honor to be here. Never a dull moment. Just so much going
An
on.
honor. I appreciate that. No one's ever said that before, so this is a first. Let's start with just sort of the state of play, I suppose. We are 10 days into the Trump administration. Lots happened. A slew of executive orders, federal spending freeze that may or may not have been rescinded, or at least parts of it. It's a little bit chaotic, but by and large, when you talk to people or you see focus groups, they're willing to give the guy a chance. What is your take of how Trump has maneuvered in the first 10 days? And is there something that he's done that has surprised you?
He seems much more politically astute in his second presidency than he was in his first. There's an evil genius to his strategy of, quote, flooding the zone. He's been issuing an endless stream of executive orders, causing Democrats like me to drink from a fire hose. So, politically, he's proven himself to be shrewd and skillful, but I do feel like he made a miscalculation when it came to the impoundment of funds. That to me was the most egregious miscalculation he's made so far into his presidency.
Let's unpack that. Why was that egregious, and why is that a miscalculation?
Well, he had to rescind. I mean, it's not clear. He claims he only rescinded the.
I'm not sure.
The executive order, but the administration seemed blindsided by the intensity of the backlash. And before the impoundment executive order, you could have made the case that we as Democrats had no unified strategy. Some Democrats were focused on DEI, and others were focused on birthright citizenship, and others were focused on the ICE raids. And for the first time, you saw a unified, universal backlash against Donald Trump's attempts to defund the government at every level. And so his overreach on impoundment was a unifying moment for Democrats.
Is your sense, just to close the book on this one, is your sense that the issue is over, as in that they've rescinded the OMB memo, or do you believe that they're going to take, or that do you believe that the efforts are still underway, or that they're going to take another whack at freezing federal funds in such a broad and spectacular manner as they did with that OMB memo?
It seems to me that Trump is intent on taking the case to the Supreme Court. He's intent on challenging the constitutionality of the Impoundment Control Act. And Donald Trump is claiming for himself the absolute authority to defund any program whenever he wishes, for whatever reason he wishes, which is something that no president has ever done to the extent that he's doing. And if Donald Trump has the authority to impound funds, then what is to stop him from impounding funds for programs like Medicare and Social Security? I mean, he's setting a dangerous precedent that could radically reshape checks and balances and separation of powers in America.
No, there's nothing to stop him. In fact, in that memo, they had a footnote saying this does not affect Medicare and Social Security. That was literally the only thing that stopped him, is they didn't want to do it. One thing I've noticed,
he's claiming he has the authority to refund anything.
Yes, correct. So the only thing that would stop him is lack of will. One thing I've noticed, and I'm sorry to belabor this point, but just the sheer lack of communication that's happened around governance. So you talk to different groups who depend on federal aid. You talk to federal workers. They are not hearing from the government. They can't get clearance about what is funded. They can't get guidance about whether they're, supposed to take the buyout. Let's talk a little bit about the absence of communication and what that does to people who depend on the government, people who work in the government.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump has plunged just recipients of federal funding into a state of chaos, confusion, and crisis. I mean, New York State alone receives about $100 billion in federal program. Our Medicaid program received $57 billion. And so there's just a whole range of programs from healthcare to food to transportation to law enforcement, counterterrorism that depends on federal funding. And there's no clarity about which federal funds are frozen and which are left untouched.
Have you sought clarity from them?
I mean, I've gotten no response. Like, I've been inquiring specifically about funding for public housing. New York has the largest stock of public housing. It houses about 500,000 New Yorkers, and we've gotten no.
So you've gone to HUD and you've been like, "Can I get some clarity?" And they just won't tell you.
I'm not aware of any member of Congress any Democratic member of the Congress who's been kept in the loop about the scope of the executive order.
That's wild. You referenced it. Democrats were sort of rudderless a little bit prior to this point. Let's talk about why they were rudderless. What do you think is going on with your party at this juncture? I mean, putting aside how they were galvanized by the impoundments issue, do you feel like the party is united on some of the other issues you talked about, DEI, immigration, even the January 6th pardons, things like that?
Yeah, it's not so much. It's not that we have disagreements about those issues, but I think there are differences of opinion as to where we should focus our energy. Where should our focus lie? And look, it's natural because we're the party out of power.
Right.
We have hundreds of members. We're an ideologically varied coalition that ranges from the Squad to the Blue Dogs. And so it's only natural that there's going to be no universally agreed upon diagnosis of what went wrong and universally agreed upon prescription of what went forward, of how to move forward. But it seems like the impoundment executive order is the one thing we all agree on.
Yeah, the real one that seems to be divisive, or at least complicating for the party, is immigration.
Yeah.
You saw a vote on the Locke and Riley Act where a number of Democrats signed on to the bill. A number of immigration groups and lawmakers warned that it was, unfunded, would have had adverse consequences in terms of detention, could cost tens of billions of dollars. And then, of course, on deportations, ICE raid, border enforcement, you're seeing these fissures in the party over immigration. Where do you think the party should best position itself? I know what you said, but as you've seen these Trump orders, and if you've seen some of the ICE raids play out, if you've seen him talk about opening up Gitmo for 30,000 detentions, where does the party rightfully take a stand?
Well, first, I do feel like we've historically swung the pendulum too far to the left.
Right.
On immigration and border security. We lost the 2024 election primarily because of inflation and immigration, and in particular, the migrant crisis.
Right.
And we have to recognize the country is considerably to the right of the party on the issue of immigration. I saw New York Times polling indicating that 87% of Americans, including more than 80% of Democrats, feel that anyone with a criminal history should be deported. And so I feel like we have to tread carefully and be careful not to deviate too far away from public opinion because we lack credibility on the issue of immigration and border security.
I get it, but you have these cities that are sort of taking divergent approaches, right? I mean, Denver, for instance, the mayor says, well, we don't want to participate or cooperate with aggressive ICE raids. In Chicago, there's concerns that the secure places that Biden had listed, churches, schools, places of worship, no longer are, sanctuaries, for lack of a better word. In New York, you have a mayor who has complications
Yes.
with this and seems to be bending over backwards to try and participate and work with Trump on these types of raids and deportations. So, where is your preferred position on this?
I feel it's a case-by-case basis. So if you're an undocumented immigrant who has no criminal history, you've been rooted in your community, you're contributing productively to our society and economy, you should unequivocally be protected from deportation. But if you have a violent criminal history, then I do feel like you should be subject to deportation. So for me, the decisive factor for me and most of the people I represent in the Bronx is public safety risk. But there's a real fear that Donald Trump is going to overreach as he's prone to do.
Well, we've already seen reports, NBC, others have said, swept up in these mass ICE raids are people who do not have criminal records, but they have been here with undocumented status. What recourse should they have? They've been literally moved out of the country.
Well, we should challenge it. But if I were mayor, I would tell the federal government, when it comes to the most violent, serious offenders, we will cooperate. But when it comes to everyone else, you will have no cooperation from the city of New York.
You said the party overtorqued on immigration for sure. I think it's unobjectively true. Like every poll has said that that harmed the party. The other thing that people are very worried about is on cultural issues, that they felt like the party went way too far in terms of DEI initiatives, transgender initiatives, things like that. On the flip side, people are worried about overtorquing in the other direction, right? They want to see people protected. You had Hakeem Jeffries, minority leader, basically say, look, we are the party of diversity. What's the right balance here? Because obviously there's a full frontal attack from the Trump administration on DEI right now.
Yeah, look, just like there's a danger in underinterpreting the results of the election, there's a danger in overinterpreting. Mm-hmm. Unlike the 1980s, when the Democratic nominee lost 49 states, Vice President Harris only lost narrowly. Shift in 1.3% of the votes in the industrial Midwest would have radically reshaped the outcome of the election and handed Vice President Harris the presidency. So that's just perspective that we should keep in mind. But I'm convinced that the cultural issues were of tertiary importance and that the main reasons we lost were inflation.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like the main reasons we lost were inflation and immigration. And if you remove those variables from the equation, Vice President Harris would be the president.
Have you seen? I don't know if you've seen the sort of the new hot Ezra Klein column about how Trump won a very narrow political war, but he won a massive cultural one. You don't agree with that?
In a world without inflation and the migrant crisis, Vice President Harris would have won.
Okay,
I believe that. I'm not suggesting the cultural issues are irrelevant. I believe it's of tertiary importance compared to inflation and the migrant.
Okay. Got you. What do you think from a tactical standpoint? I mean, this is
That's why I would not obsess about the cultural issues as much, because I feel
you feel like focus on the price of goods and making sure the border is secure, and then
lower costs, safe streets, secure borders. That's where I would keep our focus.
All right. So let's say you're given, they say, Congressman Torres, look, we want to hand you the keys to the kingdom. You set the agenda for the Democratic Party going forward. Every messaging memo is going through your office. Benny will write it. Don't worry about it. What's the messaging that you make the Democrats adopt going forward in the weeks and months ahead?
The Democratic Party should have a simple mission: lower cost, lower crime rates, create opportunity for all Americans, make government work for working people.
And then tactically, what do you do? Because this was the big thing I felt like from the election, which was they just couldn't break through to different audiences, or maybe they chose not to break through to different audiences. And the media ecosystem is very difficult. It's very balkanized. It's tricky to traverse. You're one of the more outward-facing members of Congress. How would you advise that the party adopt to the modern media landscape? What could they do differently?
The opposite of what Vice President Harris did.
What about what Joe Biden did? That was even more.
But he was a shell of his former self. But
fair enough.
She was too insulated. Yeah. And we have to recognize that we live in a brave new world of alternative media. And if we have confidence in our message, which we should, then we should be willing to take our message to every corner of the alternative media ecosystem. The average age of a cable news viewer or network news viewer is 70. It's geriatric.
Right.
So if we want to reach the next generation, we have to be engaged in alternative media and on social media.
Look, I'm not going to take personal offense. I'm an MSNBC contributor. Those are my people. Those 70 to 80-year-old Jewish mothers. They love me. Okay.
It's not either or. It should be both.
You got to do it all. You got to do it all. What about, I've heard a number of Democrats talk about the need to actually build media ecosystems. And I don't know if it's practical. I mean, obviously it's tough. Elon Musk bought Twitter and then turned it into something much more favorable towards Donald Trump. Would you like to see construction of that type of system or acquisition? Is that something that you've thought of?
It's beyond my pay grade. I mean, I feel like those of us who are in elected office, we have to focus on our core competence of winning elections and governing. And you have to approach the world as you find it. Is it the case that the alternative media ecosystem appears to have a real bias toward the political right? Yes, but we have to make the best
Got to deal with it.
of the world as we find it. Because rule number one in politics, if you're not defining what you're standing for, then others will define it for you. And I worry that the image of the Democratic Party, which is mostly center left, is either defined by the far left or by the far right. And so, unless we're engaging with alternative media, we're susceptible to caricature. We're susceptible to misrepresentation.
Do you so the House is pretty evenly divided, right? Like we were talking about like a couple votes here and there. And there's going to be some serious debates coming up on funding the government, on lifting the debt ceiling. I talked to a colleague of yours, Brendan Boyle, about this. He thinks that in these times, you need to make high leverage plays, and he wants to use the debt limit, something Democrats have traditionally just said we are going to raise regardless. He wants to use that to leverage policy gains, or at least to make sure that, for instance, federal funds aren't stopped. Are you comfortable with something like that? And just speak, in addition to that minor question, speak broadly about what objective House Democrats have when they're in this minority, but a very close minority.
Look, I'm cautiously optimistic that the Republican margin of control is so vanishingly small that we could prove to be the most powerful minority in the recent history of the House. Look, in an ideal world, I would prefer no debt ceiling.
Right.
But it would be political malpractice for House Democrats not to leverage the debt ceiling to protect the American people from the worst of a Donald Trump presidency. And in Donald Trump's first presidency, House Republicans had a much larger margin in the House than they do now. And back then, congressional Democrats were extraordinarily effective at protecting the country and protecting the social safety net from the worst of a Donald Trump presidency. The difference now is that he seems much more vindictive, much more emboldened than he's ever felt before, and he's overstepping, between the executive order ending birthright citizenship and the executive order claiming absolute authority to impound funds.
Right.
We're in uncharted territory.
But you also, so you think he's overstepping, but you also earlier said you think he's much more savvy than he was the first time around, or at least much more seasoned.
Yeah, overstepping not in the sense that it will necessarily cost him politically, right? But that he is just much more blatant in his disregard for democratic norms. That's just my sense. He's willing to challenge the basic structure of our government to an extent that no president has done before.
He did not issue an executive order to end birthright citizenship during the first time around. So this is, we are definitely in a new place. Yeah, talk a bit about your own political future. You've been rumored to have your eye on a different office.
Yeah, one of my constituents asked me, Congressman, are you planning to move up? And I said, yes, I hope to go to heaven. Can you put in a good word for me?
Not that office, man. That is an office, but we're talking about a different office. Seriously, are you looking at Albany? Are you looking, is that a serious thing?
I'm exploring a run for governor. I will make a final decision in mid-2025. No state saw a greater swing toward Donald Trump than New York. And that is not a coincidence. That was a consequence of failing governance at the state and local level. Both Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams are the worst combination of leaders that I've seen in the recent history of New York. The majority.
So why did they? I get that. What happened? Like, how did they? I mean, Hochul's a different thing, but Adams ran on being sort of tough on crime. He ran on reorienting the Democratic Party away from the left. He was Joe Biden's guy. In fact, Biden and his people called him the future of the party at one point in time. Clearly, that's not the case now. And I don't think anyone in Biden's orbit is rushing to defend him from his accusations of corruption or anything like that. But I just think politically he had a blueprint that seemed, I'm not trying to overgeneralize here, but it did seem centrist, less about standing up to, more about standing up to left. And you are, to a degree, of the same blueprint. Can you speak about whether he just failed at it, or did he change? What do you think happened?
He was right on conception and wrong on execution. But in state and local government, execution matters. And there were high hopes for Eric. There were, he did represent a center-left politics that the city desperately needed. But he filled his administration with political allies and cronies rather than technocrats who were effective at governing the city. And that to me was his Achilles. The mayor gives the impression that he has a greater interest in the title and trappings of the mayor's office than the actual mechanics of running the city.
Well, that's governance in the age of Trump, man. The office itself and the trappings of it give you the power, and it's a magnet.
Local government is different. Local government is much more managerial, much more operational. My favorite quote is from New York's most famous mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, who said, "There's no Democratic or Republican way to take out the trash." Local government is supposed to be more about competence than about ideological purity.
Yeah. All right, Congressman Ritchie Torres, I appreciate this tremendously. Thank you for your time. I do appreciate you getting out there and talking to all these outlets. It's vital to hear from folks. And thank you all for tuning in to another interview with the Bulwark. We will be giving you this content repeatedly, so do subscribe. Take care.
Take care.